Thank you, Yash and Karuti. I think now we'll give an opportunity for people to ask questions so that even though we've come from very far, we shouldn't just speak about our country. We need to hear from you. There's some roving mics.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. I just had a question to ask about the National Commission on Cohesion Integration. I think when it was put in place by the new constitution, I was very optimistic about what they would do dealing with diversity, ethnic diversity. And they did an interesting study on public service employment and ethnic composition. But I'm not sure what power that they have to actually carry out or implement correction in inequalities of, ethnic employment. And so I just want to ask from you, what was the envisioned goals for the NCIC, and what really is their mandate in correcting some of these issues? Thank you.
Okay, we'll have the second question. Please identify yourself.
I did follow that question.
Thank you. My name is Joe Clark. Mine is a question about the mechanics of devolution. You have 47 counties. That's a lot of counties. And I understand there's been some discussion about reducing that number. Could you elaborate on that? And is a reduction of numbers possible?
We'll take a third and fourth so that we deal with a number of them.
My name is Professor Moses Kigundu, Sprott School of Business, Carleton University. Thank you very much for your very informative presentations. I got a very short question. Are you putting too much emphasis on the Constitution as a document and not enough on building the systems, the structures, the values that actually are needed to build a truly democratic and socially just society?
Yes.
I'd be interested if you could talk a little bit about the degree of transparency that is provided for in your systems of oversight and the role of the media. I'm also interested in knowing to what extent the business world of Kenya operates above the table compared to below the table. Yeah, I was just going to do that. I'm Barb Darling with the Canadian International Council.
Thanks. Thank you. So, Karuti can address NCIC.
Yes.
And the mechanics of devolution. And Yash, the two other questions on too much revolutionary without revolution. And the question of the media and business.
Can I speak? Well,
yes.
Go ahead, but I may add devolution, I may add, go ahead.
Okay. The National Cohesion and Integration Commission was actually established before the new constitution came into place. It was established immediately after the post-election violence to assist in healing and reconciliation before the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission could come to place. One of the mandates is actually to ensure equitable distribution of resources, if one can say that, and to ensure absence of discrimination on ethnic, racial, religious, or any other line whatsoever. That has been its mandate. As we talk right now, and they were also concerned about hate speech. Hate speech in the sense that in 2008, post-election violence, politicians were mobilizing using hate language. So the National Cohesion and Integration Commission was established to monitor use of hate language by politicians, especially around election time or any other time, to ensure that that is reduced as much as possible. Unfortunately, that commission, the term of commissioners came to an end. We haven't had new commissions appointed for the last almost 1 year after those who are there, their term expired. There is a secretariat, and therefore we assume the government is still interested in reconstituting the commission. But one point we would like to make here is that issues of ethnic inequality, issues of discrimination and governance questions, they do not require a commission to address. If you are practicing democratic governance and inclusive politics, you will know it is very wrong and very unfair to recruit from your own ethnic community alone. If there is democratic governance and you want to follow values of democratic governance and principles of equality, you cannot do that. It's a very, very, very reason that you are following those particular values tells you that it's wrong to recruit on basis of ethnicity or race or religion. And that's what some of our politicians have not learned to do. We hope with time, once the government once we come up with leaders who believe in inclusive politics, some of these things will be addressed generally. When I teach about ethnicity, I actually give examples of Canada, but I will not tell you what example I give because you'll laugh at me. But I give very good examples about Canada, and I won't tell you what I say to my students, and they agree with me. Are we likely to reduce our counties? I think, to be honest, devolution belongs to the Kenyan people. The ordinary person is very, very, very vigilant on it. So no matter what threats there are, I think people will not let it go. And reducing is not what Kenyans may want. They may want more because they have seen the power of having their own counties and using their own resources. It is politicians who are arguing that, some politicians are arguing that the system is very expensive and therefore we need to reduce the number of counties. Rather than reduce their salaries, they earn more than Canadian members of parliament, I guess. It's $20,000 or how much is it?
Something like that.
Something close to $20,000 a month or more, if you are able to steal on different counters. So they earn more than members of parliament here in Canada, and rather than reduce their own salaries, they are thinking about reduction of counties. We don't think devolution, the number of counties will be reduced at all. What we think is that people are going to become much more vigilant on the resources that are being used at the county level. And if you don't use your resources in a good way, we think that the next general election will see you out. People will vote you out because of the failure to account for the resources you have. We have seen that happen time and again. People do not use their resources effectively, are always voted out. And the new ones who come in because there is no system of accountability behave like them.
Okay, Yash.
The question was whether this is a good idea to be so progressive.
Are we putting a lot of emphasis on the constitution without systems?
Just that and not anything else.
Yeah.
And then the other one, the role of the media.
Transparency. Yeah, I can talk about this.
Yeah, okay, I'll talk about that. Then you can add.
Okay.
Okay, let me start.
The question of media, sorry.
No, let me start.
Okay.
Well, I think there are two questions. I'm not sure I understand them fully. The question about the role of a constitution, is it just to establish a democratic system? Well, some people take that view that that constitution should just restrict itself to the system of government, and perhaps in some cases a Bill of Rights. Others believe that in many societies now, constitutions need to cover many other issues of social justice and access to resources, nation building that I started my remarks with. I belong to the second school because I think in many of these societies you are talking about, there isn't the infrastructure that you had a very much more organic development of society and constitution largely reflecting those changes and registering them rather than creating them. I don't think we can rely on that sort of approach in societies where we need to bring about fundamental changes. And these changes are, I've also advised in Nepal, and it was clear to me that the most critical problems facing Nepal were not in the realm of the government, but of society, with rather outdated Hindu structures and outcasts and so on and so forth. And it seemed important that if you believe in human rights, you also are concerned about the position of women and the untouchables, Dalits, in social structures, social society. And so I think it's justified to deal with the larger set of issues than just questions of government. I can fully understand why system of government was the primary and perhaps the exclusive focus of constitutions in Europe, because basically the dominant class in society was also dominant class politically, and our situation is very much more complex than that. And I think if you want to bring about changes all around, even if you want a democratic society, you do need to address questions of society as well. And I think the weakness of many constitutions is that though while they do provide for democratic institutions and so on, they say very little about the people as such. And unless people take more responsibility, there will not be a democratic system. And also, I want to make one point about an additional point, is the importance of the process. Some people think that the best way to make a constitution is to lock a few experts and not let them come out until the white smoke is sort of out, and let them make it. Even Moi suggested that for Kenya. He said, I'll get a Canadian, a German, an Indian, and I think he mentioned 2 other countries, and they will write a constitution. And all this matata, all these noises you're making is irrelevant. But as it happened, that the process chosen for what became the 2010 constitution was a very participatory process. And the commission itself went around the country, talked to people. Some people say that is not good, and of course it can result in a constitution which is radical without a fundamental change in leadership. It does, of course, get legitimacy because people feel they participated. My own impression was that the most helpful things I found in our process was going to the villages, small towns, sitting down with the people, listening to them. The whole agenda in my mind changed from the agenda developed by urban elites after I'd spent a few weeks up in the country. And I think that was very important for me personally, and it is to some extent reflected in the Constitution. So I know it can be overdone, and I know that many things will probably just remain on paper and nothing much will be done. So we need a very active citizenry. And if you read the Constitution, primary responsibility for accountability, for policy making is given to the people. But we are doing nothing whatsoever to operationalize that. And I believe that unless people get very involved through state and non-state institutions, we are not going to make very much progress on these constitutions. But I am well aware of the contrary argument, which says that no, nothing. All the classical people writing in England, Jennings and Ware, all were horrified that even the Bill of Rights should enter the Constitution. But other people have different views. On the question of, is it business ethics? Was that the question? Well, I think one major problem for us is the timidity of the business community. But I can understand that because we are not really market economies, however much praise World Bank may have given us. We are an administered economy. So that you require lots of a lot of permissions, licenses, lots of things are state regulated, and the really big money is not in the country among ordinary people. It is with the government, courtesy of World Bank, Chinese now, taxes, and the really big contracts are with some government agency. So you can't afford to take a high position on moral morality. You are deeply part of this system which has now become global. Today's Globe mentions this big scandal in relation to Air India by some biometric company here. We also had a Canadian biometric firm, and they were also found to have bribed the Kenyan Electoral Commission. So there is no morality in the public domain, in the business. There's no real commitment to a functioning market economy. They are very comfortable with this administered economy, with their friends in the cabinet, with their bureaucratic friends, and I'm afraid the business community has not served us well. Now you will talk about the media.
It's difficult to sum up when Yash has spoken, but I wanted to say that the media is very, very open. We have one of the most free media, I think, in the continent today. Freedom of the media, freedom of press is highly, highly respected. And this has been as a result of a long period of struggle for those particular freedoms. There has been a threat, of course, in very recent times. There is a media bill that was passed that is seeking to claw back some of the gains that the media has gained over the years. But still, Kenya's media remains one of the most free and professional media industry. Its ownership, of course, is purely private, but private interests with political interests, intertwined with political interests as well. There is a question on ICC, and I thought I will not do justice without addressing it in one or the other. I think the elephant in the room is China in Africa. If China had not shown African leaders that it's alternative to resources that are usually given with a lot of demands for accountability, if China had not shown African leaders that they can have resources for which they are not going to be asked questions about accountability and about how they are doing it and how they are implementing their various programs, things would be very different. Things across Africa started changing when China invited African leaders about 3 or 4 years ago. The largest delegation of African leaders ever been seen in Beijing. That's when things started changing in Africa. That's when African leaders started saying, we are not going to respect what the West tells us. And from then onwards, they have started mobilizing anti-West tendencies. There is anti-West nationalism that is sweeping across the continent because there is a clear alternative. And that alternative has got its own strange conditions as well. Chinese is the elephant in the room. Let me stop there.
Any other question? Okay, we'll have the 2 last ones. We'll have 1 and 2. She can stand.
Thank you very much. It's been really, really interesting. My name is Angela Mione, and I work with the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development for the South Sudan program.
I can't hear you.
We can't hear.
My name is Angela Mione, and I work with the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development with the South Sudan program. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about the gains and reversals that have been made in terms of gender equality. You've touched on it briefly, but it would be interesting to hear more about that. Thank you.
Turkana land or Turkana counties have a scattering of marginalized tribesmen and tribeswomen. The place is not developed by any standards. Infrastructure is very poor. Job opportunities are hardly there. Schools, health systems literally are very, very minimal. Now reports indicate that oil has been struck in sizable quantities, and talks are already going on to extract oil, to exploit oil. This will result in increased revenues as well as in a demographic change in that particular area. Is there any provision in the Constitution for a special trust fund for such revenues to be applied primarily for socio-economic development of the Turkana people? Thank you.
I didn't get that question either.
Is there a provision in the Constitution for socio-economic development of Turkana people where they're going to get oil and gas? What is the provision to develop them? Yeah.
Okay, so Yash, would you like to go first?
Okay, on the last question, I'm afraid there's very little in the Constitution about natural resources. The Constitution allocates to the central government authority over minerals and natural resources generally. Earlier versions of the Constitution had provided for some compensation for the communities within which these are discovered and exploited, and some sharing. And I think even to the counties, there was to be some form of payment. These disappeared in the long period. This draft was floating around. And now this has become a major issue. And we don't know what the answers are. If you look at the legal framework, at the moment, basically, it's the Constitution merely saying they belong to the national government. There is no mention of a trust fund. The legislation on minerals is rather ancient. We have a new bill which is now before Parliament, which is very orthodox and doesn't really give people. Some communities are now opposing. There's a case, Katiba Institute is involved about coal mining with Chinese. It's in your village, isn't it? Near there. And so this case is now before the court. So we'll see what happens. Others are saying that there should be some kind of an understanding that if minerals are found, wherever they're found, that the informed consent of the people living there to any agreement that may be made, a certain percentage of the income must go to them. But the government hasn't shown much interest in that, as indeed some other countries now do have reasonably good legislation on that. But we don't have. And at one stage I thought that the Canadian government was going to help us to draft some legislation, maybe looking at the First Nations people. But I was told then that the government has changed its mind. They think they don't need Canadians to help us on this. But we in civil society are extremely interested in this, and we would very much like, maybe with IDRC money and Canadian experts who we have already identified, to come and talk about options. We have been looking at Papua New Guinea's new legislation, which is relatively positive, and so we think that it's important to explore these options, including the idea of a trust. The rumor is that Kenya is sitting on the largest supply of water under the soil, so much oil, some rare minerals, and so everybody is in great expectation of wealth, and it could all go wrong, as it often does. And we always say, as you discipline a child and say, remember Nigeria, if you think gold is or minerals are a good thing, but it doesn't seem to percolate down to the authorities.
Thank you. Very quickly, Karuti, on gender.
Gains and reversals in gender. The Constitution came out very clearly that no more than 2/3 from one gender should comprise appointive and elective positions, both in public and probably even in private sector, because people now are vigilant to ensure that it's also done in the private sector. Anywhere you go, that's what is being looked for. A major reversal is that Parliament did not pass the law to operationalize this. And still that law has not been passed as we talk. The deadline for doing so is next year, August 15th, and we don't know what will happen by then.
Okay, thank you very much, Yash and Karuti.